Let's talk about the scary sexual secrets of a woman that is key to problem-solving man's sexuality. First, I would like to mention that in today's society, there are basically 6 major categories of individuals who are sexually active, generally by their own free will. And they are 1. Consensual adults and or teens experimenting with sex. 2. Monogamous couples or partners who are sexually active. 3. Couples or individuals who are sexually active without commitment. 4. Swingers that are often involved in random group sex. 5. Individuals that sell sex for money or trade, including pornographic performers. And lastly, individuals that solely masturbate with or without objects or exhibition. But let's focus on monogamous couples or partners who are sexually active. By design, women will always have the most powerful domination of sexual control on the planet that gives them the manpower to problem solve man's sexuality. The problem? Many devoted men being unjustly sexually rejected by their partner that causes them to have emotional confusion and hormonal chaos. The solution truly relies in the sexual secrets of a woman, explained later, that are very manipulating by nature, and the fact that no man can alter them makes them very, very scary. Men are therefore at the mercy of a woman's decision for her to accept moral responsibility to resolve his sexual problem by her first deciding not to take part in being part of the problem. A woman must first understand and accept the truth of her full sexual function by nature, including her limitations when compared to a man's greater sexual appetite. However, if our culture beliefs were changed and a woman's sexual appetite was indeed deemed to be inadequate, the truth would then hit home and become a very hard pill to swallow for the average woman. Many women will falsely interpret these inadequacies to be sexist remarks and try to discredit or deflect the truth by changing society's way of thinking that the information is false and they are simply victims of woman bashing. Oddly enough, if a woman claims that most men do too much thinking with the wrong head, she would be right. But it does not mean that she's a sexist or male bashing either. It means she found it to be a scientific fact and merely spoke the truth that men think about sex way too much on a daily basis. Though many men may still accuse her of being a sexist by stereotyping them like this. Ironically, Mother Earth can almost be construed as being a sexist herself due to the scientific fact of her creating heterosexuals with a global biased perception that human beings with vaginas are not as capable as human beings with penises, as is suggested by her biological design of both sexes. Nonetheless, we must have an open mind and understand other scientific facts that over recent years, men have increasingly become more sexually needy and women sexually greedy. A vast amount of women are greedy just by deliberately being more indulging and accessible to a man's sexual needs. Women are not literally greedy for the act of sex, but it appears that way because sex is the path they use to motivate men to accommodate their needs. In this case, and aside from oversexed young females who freely explore their sexual fantasies, there is a trend that most mature adult women today are seeking male partnership at a faster pace, more than ever, for physical protection, stability, financial security, and or even to start a family. This faster pace, however, is mostly encouraged by our broken society of a political biased government causing more economic chaos, urban stress, and hardship living. Therefore, other than those wanting a soulmate strictly based on religious philosophy or their own interpretations, a woman's strategy is to quickly encourage a man to willfully embellish her lifestyle, in part by her using sex appeal and by establishing mutual interest in many things, including sports. Social media is the best practical playground for a woman to have acceptance of her sexual ambition. And since she is always on a competitive mission to meet and greet a viable man, it is not uncommon that countless women these days are clearly more aggressive, promiscuous, shameless, and bold. Our environment is literally pregnant with a more liberal philosophy of sexual freedom that is expressed and displayed in strategic ways to quicken a man's plan of action. Apparently, old school feminine enticement takes too long these days for a woman to become a man's benefactor. Her new school aggressive behavior is now the forerunning routine of connecting or bonding with a man. However, once this bond is born either by righteous passion or the battle of the sexist strategy, man's need for sex is still subjected to deprivation, depreciation, or outright rejection, as a woman possessing man power will demonstrate in more ways than one. For most new relationships, sexual relations is essentially the greatest pastime over any other activity. But as they pass through time into an ongoing routine of sex, committed couples, and primarily women, may eventually lose their enthusiasm and become sexually dormant most of the time, mainly due to an emotional disconnect. The man would describe his sweetheart as to being on some sort of a sex fast, unless of course she has an ongoing high sex drive that is matched with his, in which case would be a unique love connection. Therefore, problem-solving man's sexuality would not exist as long as her highly sexed hormones are consistent with his. Nonetheless, from girlfriend to fiancé, the average woman's sexuality is initially her top priority, mainly to encourage a permanent partnership of good fortune. Sooner or later, though, it is mainly the woman of the relationship that mandates a change in her sexual priorities that gradually shifts toward other domestic doings, with intimacy becoming the least important benefit or obligation. In spite of this, and depending on cultural beliefs, men all over the world are naturally sexually driven and compelled to offer a great deal of mental and physical resources to his significant other in an ongoing effort, hoping sooner or later that his works will please her enough to stimulate intimacy or sexual interest. Now, men, you have to admit this is true. She showing interest lets him know his efforts are clearly recognized and have a significant value, and this is important to a man. Even men with health issues with vigorous urges continue to be viable and diligent through their stress and struggle to maintain a diplomatic bond and sexual connection. Yet most of these men remain vexed with confusion about the sexual standards of a woman and why she rejects him sexually even when no domestic drama exists. Men feel that many seasoned wives or faithful women are sexually short-sighted with no justifiable reason to regulate intimacy with less activity. For example, oftentimes when the husband desires to be more sexually active, it becomes a problem for his spouse. Also, in retrospect to his common ailments, she may rarely feel 100% herself to warrant efforts to engage in sex, and will inadvertently choose to sleep many times after managing her responsibilities. But isn't the husband or significant her responsibility too, and worth the sacrifice for an intimate time out? Especially since she routinely sacrifices or pushes herself to do other domestic business. She willfully attends friends and family affairs or other recreational functions that seem to have more priority, while she remains under these same ailing conditions with an occasional sudden headache or that time of the month, which may be true on occasion. These justifications are just added to her arsenals of adversity or rejection. When she's in the mood and clearly her spouse is not, or he is not, then he has the same obligation to give her a sexual time out. Although unlike him, she is unlikely to encourage it due to her hormones being less aggressive, and that's by nature. Still, at the end of the day, if the wife is not in the mood, she will not think about how important the husband's biological needs are and end up in a sex fasting routine. She would have to be very emotionally tied and have a lot of respect for her husband's or significant sexuality before feeling sexually obligated enough to alter her mood. As a man reaches his sexual peak, though, his hormones may be less aggressive, suggesting to her that she may no longer need sex fasting. Nope, not at all. Science today has perverted the natural laws of man's sexual proclivities to remain hyperactive. Her sex fasting may therefore continue after all, as surgeries, sexual devices, prescriptions, organic therapeutic solutions are available to extend man's prostate or sex life. Contrary to man's nature, it is a woman's nature that has trained his mind and body to remain steadfast in his animal attraction, to always want extended years of sexual involvement with her. Otherwise, with all things being equal, by nature, the woman's sexual peak would far exceed the pace of a man's sexual activity. In the meantime, it may interest women to know that simple pleasures of sexual intimacy goes a long way in nurturing a man's mind and has an even greater impact giving positive energy to the husband that feels stressed and somber most of his days. And in challenging times, it will potentially uplift the man's spirit, reduce his stress, and make him feel that his wife and toils of life are worth enduring. And as a leader, help strengthen his mental state to be more reasonable or benevolent, even when confronted with domestic issues. She simply owes it to herself to make him the hero of her legacy. Remember, the wife or the like is like a helpmate and is generally considered a better half or the better half of wisdom and common sense. So if it is that difficult for the wife to be sexually compliant, then she should remodel her love to have a bigger heart and understand the fact that man's sexual hormones by nature, and in most cases, drives him to need more sexual gratification than that of a woman. It is discouraging enough when she makes an effort to bond and fakes or ignores sexual stimulation with a less sex drive in the first place, which is no wonder why she consciously feels that she's making a big sacrifice or a one-sided reward or charity, unless of course he has ED, erectile dysfunction, which under these circumstances would null and void any notion of a sex fast anyway. Women alike typically discourage or ignore their man's display of sexual hints or bonding efforts. You know, I'm sure men, we do this all the time. You know, these hints, and they typically get ignored or sidetracked. So man, he tends to shy away from her to find ways to deflect his interest. You know, his inapt solution is to use the out of sight, out of mind logic that will unfortunately push their enthusiasm even further apart.